Let's talk about the 1970s. It wasn't just a decade, you know? It was a collision. A real high-pressure moment of conflict and creativity, of decay and just pure cultural explosion. This was a time when the future was literally being written on subway walls, programmed into tiny silicon chips, and blasted through massive nightclub speakers.
It was a decade of grit and of glam,
A decade defined by urban decay.
but also by these impossible dreams. It was like it threw everything into a blender and just hit go.
You know, Vogue magazine called it right at the very start of the decade. They said there are no rules in the fashion game now. And they were right. The old rule book was completely tossed out. You had all these new synthetic fabrics flooding the market, and for the first time, style was really up for grabs. Individuality, that was the new uniform.
So, let's start our story in the pressure cooker itself. We're talking about the big urban centers of the East Coast and the Midwest, where the rhythm of just trying to survive became the beat of a whole new revolution.
So you've got this backdrop of economic collapse, of urban blight, and what happens? The streets themselves become a canvas. Out of all this hardship, these raw, unfiltered forms of cultural expression weren't just born. They felt necessary.
Okay, check this out. On one side you have punk, this absolute explosion of leather, ripped t-shirts, safety pins, all centered around places like CBGB and downtown Manhattan. It was aggressive, it was anarchic. And then, on the other side, up in the South Bronx, you had the first wave of hip-hop style bubbling up. And that was all about taking what you had, tracksuits, bomber jackets, sneakers, and wearing it with this incredible ingenuity and pride that created a whole new look. Two totally distinct rebellions, born from the very same urban crisis.
And the sound of that rebellion? Well, it has an actual address. 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. This is where a Jamaica-born DJ named Kool Herc noticed that at his block parties, the crowd went absolutely wild during the instrumental break of a funk or soul record. So he got two turntables, and he figured out how to isolate and loop those breaks, creating the very foundation of hip-hop music right there.
Now, here's where it gets really wild. A citywide crisis actually sped this whole thing up. See, the massive blackout in 1977 led to widespread looting, and a lot of what got stolen was high-end DJ equipment. Suddenly, the tools of the trade were in the hands of hundreds of aspiring DJs all across the Bronx. It basically democratized the entire art form overnight.
So this music wasn't about escaping reality. This was reality. Artists like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five used these new beats to paint this vivid, unflinching picture of the world around them. This wasn't just party music. It was like the news, reported straight from the front lines of urban decay.
All right, let's completely shift gears. We're going to jump coasts, because while New York was just shivering through a crisis, Los Angeles was basically basking in the sun, creating a totally different kind of revolution. LA in the 70s was a world away from the Bronx. It was fueled by a booming economy, a place of what people called positive hedonism. Here, the cultural battles weren't being fought on the streets, but on sound stages, in recording studios, and pretty soon, in everyone's living room.
High up in the Hollywood Hills, there was this place, Laurel Canyon. Graham Nash called it a beautiful bubble of creativity. And it was. It was a secluded haven for artists like Joni Mitchell, the Eagles, and they were all cross-pollinating folk, rock, and psychedelia to create a sound that just completely defined the early part of the decade. A sound as mellow and sun-drenched as the city itself.
But the biggest LA revolution wasn't happening in the hills. It was happening at home. The invention of home video kicked off a massive format war. You had Sony's Betamax, which was first and had a better picture, but then came RCA's VHS. It was cheaper, and crucially, it could record a whole movie. And because its patent was open, it just completely took over the market, changing how we watch movies forever. And then came this, the Atari 2600. It brought arcade games like Space Invaders right into your living room. By 1982, they had sold 10 million of them. This wasn't just a toy. It created a whole new focal point for family life, the electric hearth. Suddenly, entertainment wasn't just something you watched, it was something you did.
And this just perfectly sums up the two faces of LA style. Up in Laurel Canyon, you had that earthy, artisanal boho look, right? Caftans, flared jeans, a total free spirit vibe. But then you go down to the Sunset Strip, and glam rock was king. We're talking androgynous, futuristic, totally theatrical. Silver jumpsuits, tons of sequins, and these insane sky-high platform boots.
So you have the raw grit of the East Coast, And the plastic fantastic dreams of the West Coast. Where in the world did it all come together? Well, there was one place, the dance floor.
Disco was the great cultural synthesizer. I mean, it wasn't just a genre of music, it was a social phenomenon. It created this kind of temporary utopia on the dance floor, a space where the street styles born in the Bronx could literally mix with the high-fashion glamour of the jet set. It was this universal discotheque, the one place where absolutely everyone, at least for a few hours, could be a star.
And oh yeah, it had a uniform designed for one thing, to be seen. This was a total celebration of new, man-made fabrics that would shimmer and move with your body under the lights. Polyester and spandex hugged every curve. Kiana, this luxury synthetic nylon, draped like silk but was tough enough for the dance floor. From these figure-hugging wrap dresses to wild jumpsuits, these weren't just clothes, they were your ticket to a new kind of freedom.
But even here, there was a split. You had these super exclusive clubs like Studio 54, and that was all about high-fashion glamour. Designer dresses by Halston, iconic moments like Bianca Jagger riding in on a white horse. But then you look at a show like Soul Train and you saw a totally different kind of style. It was much more about comfort and being practical for dancing. Matching jeans, activewear, jumpsuits. It was less about who you were wearing and way more about how you moved.
So the disco beat eventually fades, of course, but the synthesis it created, well, it echoes to this day. And it shaped the very way culture moves, from the street all the way to the mainstream.
Okay, so here's the crucial point, the big takeaway. The 70s established a brand new cultural pipeline. A raw, authentic style is born out of pure necessity in a place like the South Bronx. Then it gets amplified by musical artists in the 80s, and all of a sudden, that same bomber jacket and those oversized laces are showing up on runways in Paris. It created a blueprint that completely flipped the old top-down model of fashion. It was a pipeline where the grid of the street would permanently define the glitz of the entire globe.
Which leaves us with one final question. I mean, the 1970s was a decade of so much social friction, economic hardship, and just profound change. But right in the middle of all that chaos, we created these little sanctuaries of sound and style. The block party, the folk rock commune, the nightclub. So maybe, in a decade of crisis and chaos, the place we truly found ourselves was on the dance floor.